We live in a world where a man can't even buy a cup of coffee for a stranger without 50 cameras flashing to prove it happened. Everything today is a loud, cheap show. But real loyalty, true brotherhood, that's always been quiet. It's the kind of bond sealed with a firm handshake, not a press release. Think about the greatest names in Hollywood history, the real old school legends, men like John Wayne. They didn't need applause to do what was right. In fact, one of the greatest acts of honor the Duke ever performed happened entirely in the shadows. You probably have a dog-eared, black and white photograph tucked away in your wallet right now. An old army buddy, a mentor, a friend who stood by you when the chips were down. Maybe you've felt that heavy ache in your chest, realizing you waited too long to say thank you, or that you couldn't make it to their final farewell. You aren't alone in that feeling. It's the price of being a man of a certain era. But what if I told you that even the toughest cowboy to ever grace the silver screen carried that exact same weight? Today, we are going to look past the costumes and the movie sets. I'm going to show you the untold story of what John Wayne did for an old, forgotten stuntman when absolutely no one else was watching. It's a story the modern studios tried to bury because it doesn't fit their shiny narrative. By the end of this video, you'll understand one undeniable truth. Those who live for the show are forgotten, but the legends of those who leave in silence remain. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's remember what true honor really looks like. Let's go back in time for a minute. Back to the late 1960s, the desert sun, the suffocating dust, the heavy smell of gunpowder. Back then, they didn't have green screens or computer graphics to save them. When a man fell off a horse at 30 miles an hour, he hit real dirt. He broke real bones. There was a guy on set with Wayne, let's call him Frank. Frank wasn't the star. His name never made it to the big, flashing marquee lights. He was one of the stuntmen, the riggers, the working-class guys who bled and sweat out in the heat, just so the studio executives in their comfortable, air-conditioned offices could get rich. John Wayne knew this. The Duke wasn't just an actor playing a cowboy. He was a man who understood the sheer value of hard work. He knew that without men like Frank, there was no movie. One blistering afternoon, a stunt went horribly wrong. A rigged wagon snapped, timber and iron flying everywhere. It was Frank who threw his body in the way, taking a massive hit that shattered his ribs, just to make sure the Duke didn't get crushed under the weight. In today's world, an accident like that gets you a massive lawsuit and a PR apology. Back then, it got you a brother for life. Wayne didn't make a big, dramatic speech about it. He just helped pull Frank from the wreckage, looked him dead in the eye, gave that famous nod, and quietly said, "I owe you, partner." But time is a cruel thief, isn't it? The years rolled by. John Wayne became a global icon, a permanent fixture in American history. But Frank, his body gave out. The studio suits eventually deemed him too old, too broken. They tossed him aside like a rusted tool. You probably know how that goes. The phone stops ringing. Your pride tells you not to ask for help, even when the arthritis makes it hard to stand, and the medical bills start piling up on the kitchen table. Frank never called John Wayne. That's the thing about men from that generation. They would rather lose their house than beg for a handout. It's a stubborn kind of pride, the kind you probably understand all too well. It's the pride of a man who worked with his hands all his life and doesn't know how to ask for charity. So, Frank sat in his dusty living room, watching the bank notices pile up, waiting for the inevitable. But out in Hollywood, Wayne heard the whispers. Not from a publicist, not from a manager, but from an old sound guy who happened to know Frank's neighbor. Now, if this happened today, a celebrity would set up an online fundraiser, post a crying video on social media, and make sure their face was right on the thumbnail. They'd want you to know how generous they are. But the Duke, he didn't call the press. He didn't even call Frank, because Wayne knew that handing a proud man charity is like stripping away the last piece of dignity he has left. Instead, Wayne made one quiet phone call to his accountant. A few days later, a plain, unmarked envelope arrived in Frank's mailbox. No return address, no letter inside, just a cashier's check, large enough to pay off the mortgage, cover the hospital bills, and keep the lights on for the rest of his days. When Frank took that check to the bank, the teller told him the debt was already settled. An anonymous benefactor had taken care of it. Frank walked out of that bank, leaned against the brick wall, and for the first time in his hard, calloused life, he wept. He knew exactly who sent it. He didn't need a signature to recognize the firm handshake of an old friend reaching out across the years. It was a debt repaid in blood, settled in silence. But this wasn't the end of the story. The true test of their bond wouldn't happen until years later, on a cold, rainy Tuesday, when it was time to say the final goodbye. Years went by. Frank's body, battered by decades of hard falls and broken bones, finally gave out. It was a bleak Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, overcast day that makes the world feel heavy. They held the service at a small, forgotten cemetery on the outskirts of town. There were maybe 20 people there. His widow, a couple of neighbors, and a few old, gray-haired riggers who still remembered the man he used to be. Most of the men standing around that open grave were wearing suits that smelled faintly of mothballs, the kind of suits a working man only pulls out of the closet for weddings and funerals. The industry Frank had given his blood and sweat to, they didn't send a single flower. No studio executives came to pay their respects. No reporters, no cameras. Just the steady, quiet sound of rain hitting cheap umbrellas. It seemed like Frank was going to leave this world exactly how he lived in it, unnoticed by the people at the top. The preacher was just finishing the final prayer when everyone heard the slow crunch of tires on wet gravel. A heavy, dark car pulled up near the back of the cemetery gates. The door opened, and out stepped a mountain of a man in a simple, dark overcoat. John Wayne. He didn't tell his agent he was coming. He didn't bring a photographer to document his good deed for the Sunday papers. He just walked up that grassy hill, his heavy boots sinking into the mud, and stood quietly at the very back of the small crowd. He kept his head bowed, the rain dripping silently from the brim of his hat. He didn't try to make it about him. When the service finally ended and the handful of mourners began to scatter back to their cars, Wayne walked up to the casket alone. He stood there in the chilling rain, took off his hat, placed his large, weathered hand on the damp wood, and whispered, "Rest easy, Frank. The debt is paid. I'll see you down the trail." Wayne turned up his collar against the biting rain and walked back down the hill. He didn't stop to shake hands or chat with anyone. He just got into the back of his car, the engine rumbled, and he drove away. That was the last time anyone from the industry ever saw Frank. And Wayne, he never spoke of it. Not in a magazine interview, not on a late-night talk show. The only reason we know this story today is because years after the Duke himself passed away, that same old sound guy finally broke his silence and told the tale. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other acts of quiet mercy, how many life-saving debts were paid in the dark by the men of that generation? Men who understood that your word was your bond and your actions didn't need an audience. We're losing that kind of quiet dignity today. The world has gotten too loud, too desperate for attention. But those of us who remember, we know the truth. You know the truth. So before you click away and go back to the noise of the modern world, I want you to do something. Think about the man who stood by you when times were tough. The guy who pulled you out of the wreckage. If you still can, pick up the phone and call him. If they're already gone, leave their name in the comments below. Let's build a memorial right here for the men who did it right, the men who never asked for applause. Because a true legend isn't built on how many people see you do good. It's built on exactly what you do when the cameras stop rolling. Stay strong, gentlemen. I'll see you down the trail.